And if we're stuck in the Middle East, which it looks like we are, to create, by the way, opening the Straits of Hormuz, which we had before the war started. So I worry that we're going to put all of our effort there, leaving Russia and China openings to start something even worse. And that's what our...
Hey everyone, welcome back. Really glad you're here for this one because honestly, this video stopped me in my tracks. So what you're about to watch is a panel of retired military generals and analysts breaking down the situation in the Middle East, specifically around the Strait of Hormuz, potential boots on the ground, and what the collapse of decades-old alliances could actually mean for America's position in the world. And what makes this conversation so striking is that these are not politicians. These are military professionals. And some of what they say out loud is the kind of thing most people in official positions would never say on camera. Stick with this one all the way through, because the moment that closes this clip is genuinely one of the most sobering things I've heard said about this conflict. Mawan, I don't want you to miss the context that builds up to it. Also, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're watching from. I always love seeing how far this community reaches, and honestly, it blows me away every single time. All right, let's get into it.
Just in general, what are you watching right now? Like, what should people be watching?
To me, we've got to understand that the Iranian government is not fighting a war, they're fighting resistance. And in a resistance operation, you win by not losing. And they think we're losing by not winning. So what I'm watching more than anything else is what's going to happen with the government. Are they going to fight or are they going to resist to the last man? I think that's why Brett says this is going to take at least 3 weeks, but the enemy has a vote and they may want to drag this out as long as they can.
In a sense, is the U.S. fighting an insurgent?
They're fighting in very many ways the standard insurgency tactics, which is you've got the watches, we've got the time.
Right.
We're not going to put long duration boots on the ground presence in Iran. I don't think that's ever been an objective in terms of the strategy going, from the outset of this campaign. So I do believe that the Marines coming in are going to provide Commander CENTCOM some great agility in terms of potentially going after some of those shore-based or onshore or nearshore based locations that can threaten into the Strait of Hormuz and also into the Gulf of Oman as you're entering from the east. But I don't believe we'll put them on the ground for a long duration of time.
Okay, so explain to us what that would look like. Getting on shore, how far on shore, staying on shore, the dangers of being on shore, because I think those are questions that a lot of people will have looking at this.
Yes, so the capability that's coming in with the Marine Amphibious Ready Group, they have the Osprey, which is a tilt rotor aircraft, and I think most are familiar with now. So they have that means to get on shore. They also have landing craft as part of their, as part of the element coming in terms of for infiltration and exfiltration onshore, over the beach type operations. So there's a lot of capability there. So the options of getting onto land, that would typically be for a short duration operation. The Marines historically, you set aside Iraq and Afghanistan are long, multi-decade wars. The Marines typically go in to establish a lodgment or a beachhead to support for follow-on forces. So absent of that, because we don't have any indication that there are follow-on forces coming in, I could see them supporting going after potentially weapon storage sites that maybe have not been able to get completely eliminated, from the air. Or also, as we discussed previously, one of the missions that the Marines have, the Marine Expeditionary Unit, is to support a special operation. So if there is one, they could serve as that outer cordon of security. All of those are high risk, Brianna, because even though we've done a great job of eliminating the ballistic missile threat, there's still a lot of artillery that exists within the Iranian conventional forces and a lot of short-range rockets, other capabilities that we haven't specifically targeted yet. So that's definitely a concern going forward.
So, and I hear what you're saying, that this might be limited. They might not be that far on shore, but that would be troops on the ground. Would that fundamentally change the nature of this war? Because certainly in the eyes of the American public, it very likely will.
This is the moment that should make everyone stop and actually pay attention, because this military analyst didn't bring politics, he brought a professional military assessment, and what he described should completely reframe how people think about what's happening here. When he said the Iranian government is not fighting a war, they're fighting a resistance, that one sentence changes the entire conversation, because a war and a resistance require completely different strategies to beat. A war has a finish line. A resistance, the finish line keeps moving. You cannot bomb a resistance into surrendering, because surrendering was never part of the plan to begin with. And here's what people don't realize. This playbook has been used throughout history. A smaller force doesn't need to win outright. They just need to survive long enough for the larger side to exhaust its patience, its resources, and its political will. That is the strategy. And the analyst basically confirmed that's exactly what's unfolding here. The line that hit me hardest was when he said, "You've got the watches, we've got the time." That is not clever wordplay. That is the core of how asymmetric warfare works. Superior firepower costs money, equipment, and public support, and the clock is always running against the side with more to lose. So when the conversation shifts to Marines potentially going ashore, and the analyst immediately flags that all of those options are high risk because conventional artillery and short-range rockets within Iranian forces have not been specifically targeted yet, that is a military professional telling you in plain language that the ground situation is far more complicated than the public messaging suggests. The question about whether boots on the ground would fundamentally change the nature of this conflict gets raised for a reason, because the answer matters enormously, and not everyone in that room wants to say it out loud.
I don't think it would change the nature of the desired outcome in terms of the objectives that the administration has set forth. But putting a sustained presence, which I don't think the Marines would be used for in this instance, that would certainly change the view of the war to date. But I don't believe that that's going to be the intent of how the Marines will be used. If in fact, decisions made to even put them on shore, it could be. I think they have 5 to 6 more days before they're actually in the vicinity of the Gulf of Oman. If that's where they end up deploying to, that it could be a situation where the operational environment has changed to the point where they don't need to be used on shore. So that's the kind of the agility and flexibility that I believe Commander CENTCOM, on behalf of the National Command Authority, wants.
Can the U.S. secure the Strait of Hormuz, get oil flowing through that region, besides just Iranian oil, without what you're describing?
Well, they can. We have air superiority right now. We have the ability to continue to engage locations where we believe Iran can deploy, whether it's drones or short-range ballistic missiles, long-range artillery, and even the fast boats that we talked about. So we have the capability is moving in. The littoral combat ships that replace the countermine frigates that we had there prior to the new year, as we discussed, CENTCOM does not have the number that they would optimally like to have, certainly. So it's going to be far more challenging, and that's why allies and partners coming in to support freedom of navigation is so important. And it sounds like right now, I'm sure there's still work going on behind the scenes, but right now there's not a lot of nations signing up to support, absent of the Gulf states that are already committed just by virtue of it's their commerce that needs to flow both in and out through the Gulf of Oman, and then of course into the upper Persian Gulf.
We have built a system of alliances over the last 80 years that has worked brilliantly for the United States of America. And as Winston Churchill once said, the only thing worse than having allies is having no allies. And we went into this war without consulting our allies. So the Trump doctrine, in a way, is move fast and break things. And that doesn't allow us to work with our allies. So what are our allies feeling right now? Well, if you're Europe, you're worried about Russia. You're worried about them but the hybrid attacks they're making into Europe right now, and the fact that now we've lifted the oil embargo, so that's providing money to them. Also, our THAAD and Patriot missiles are now being used up that Ukraine can't use. They're not being consulted. And the Asia feels the same way. 70% of their oil comes through the Straits. The Japanese weren't consulted. The South Koreans weren't consulted. And now we're sending forces, the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit from Okinawa to the Mediterranean, to the Gulf, which means that all those forces that we had to protect them against China are not being used there, but being used in the Gulf. So our allies now, and then we're going to ask them to participate in this. And no wonder they are worried about that, because we have not put the work in previously to bring our allies into this. So it worries me that we're going to go into this with just our Israeli allies and not as part of a large coalition, which again will mean difficulty going forward. Remember, the enemy gets a vote, and their vote is that we have a clock, but they have the time. And I think it's going to be very difficult to end this thing quickly.
Here is the section that should genuinely alarm people, because back-to-back admissions come out here that each one, on its own, would be a major story. First, the analyst confirms that CENTCOM does not have the number of specialized naval vessels they would optimally want for this situation. Let that land. We are in a conflict centered entirely around a strait, and the specialized capability needed to actually clear that strait is undersupplied. That's not a political talking point. That came directly from a military professional, and then immediately after that admission, the described strategy depends heavily on allies and coalition partners stepping in, which would make sense, except the anchor points out that right now, not many nations are signing up, so the strategy requires something, that something is not currently available. And the reason it's not available leads directly to the next point. The analyst says, we went into this conflict without consulting our allies, and he describes the governing doctrine behind this as move fast and break things. You have to understand what that phrase actually means when applied to foreign policy. Move fast and break things was a Silicon Valley philosophy designed for building software. It works when a bad decision can be fixed with an update pushed overnight. It does not work when you are managing 70 years of carefully constructed international relationships. Japan wasn't consulted, South Korea wasn't consulted, and 70% of Asia's oil flows through those straits. These are not distant observers. Their entire economies are directly tied to what happens there. And they found out the same way the rest of the world did. Now think about what comes next. After not consulting them, after not bringing them into the decision at all, the ask is going to come for their support and participation. That is an extremely difficult conversation to have. And you can hear in this analyst's voice that he knows exactly how uncomfortable that reality is.
Secretary Hegseth, actually, he spoke at the beginning of the war, and he was complimenting Israel and really kind of putting down past allies, particularly European allies who had worked with America. He was talking about the importance of capable partners compared to, quote, our traditional allies who wring their hands and clutch their pearls, hemming and hawing about the use of force. I wonder what your read is on that, for maybe what the administration was expecting to need in terms of help from Europe, and also how that kind of talk affects the dynamics here.
Well, remember, it's a great question. We're a geopolitical power. We're a world power. Israel's a regional power, and they may be close to being a regional hegemon. But if we need help against China or need help against Russia, we're not going to get it from Israel. We're going to get it from our Asian partners and from our European partners. So the idea that we would somehow denigrate them seems to me short-sighted and goes against the historical foundation of these of our great alliances. Remember, how many allies does China have? One or two. How many does Russia have? One or two. How many does Iran have? One or two. We have dozens and dozens if we use them properly, but we have to respect what they want. So it worries me when Secretary Hegseth makes these pronouncements that denigrate these great allies who have, by the way, who have died for America in Afghanistan. And he was there when we did that. So I think that is incredibly short-sighted to go after them. Israel is very capable, but they're capable in the Middle East, not in the world.
Are you looking at sort of the alliances, the order, the order post-World War II differently in light of how you see America relating to its allies in this conflict?
I think so, because I think we look at what they put in after 1945. We went into World War I and then and won that war, and then left Europe. And look what happened with that vacuum of power. Another world war came. After World War II, we created these series of alliances that served the United States incredibly well, served us best of all, not just militarily, but also economically. And so if we're going to break these alliances and break the post-war era, post-war alliance system, we're going to get into something that we don't want in the United States of America, which is ruled by the strongest. But remember, that's not just us. That is China and Russia. And if we're looking at this at a world level, it's China and Russia that are the major powers that are a problem. And if we're stuck in the Middle East, which it looks like we are, to create, by the way, opening the Straits of Hormuz, which we had before the war started. So I worry that we're going to put all of our effort there, leaving Russia and China openings to start something even worse. And
Oh, this part. This is the section I've been most eager to react to. Because when the anchor brings up what Secretary Pete Hegseth said at the very start of this conflict, calling traditional allies the ones who wring their hands and clutch their pearls, hemming and hawing about the use of force, that told you everything about the underlying philosophy driving these decisions. Think about what that framing actually communicates to the world. It says the people who slow down to ask questions, who want a coalition, who want a strategy, who want to think through second and third order consequences, those are the weak ones. The ones who act fast and alone are the strong ones. That is the logic. And then this analyst, a military veteran, delivers what I think is the most devastating response in the entire video. He says these great allies, by the way, died for America in Afghanistan. The secretary was there. He served alongside those partnerships. He knows what shared sacrifice in a coalition actually looks like in practice. So reducing those partners to pearl clutchers, after everything those alliances have actually meant, that is not just politically short-sighted. That is a failure to understand what those relationships are actually built on. Here's something I want people to actually absorb because the historical context matters. After World War I, America helped win that war and then stepped back from Europe entirely. And what filled that power vacuum? Another world war within 2 decades. What prevented that pattern from repeating after 1945 was the entire post-war alliance system. And decades of agreements that said, we are in this together. That system didn't just protect other countries. It served American interests more than anyone else's, both militarily and economically. That is documented history. And then the analyst closes with the line that I believe is the single most important moment in this entire clip. He says, if we're stuck in the Middle East trying to open the Straits of Hormuz, which we already had before this started, then we are potentially leaving room for far larger global threats to move while our attention and resources are fully committed elsewhere. That reframes everything. We disrupted something that was functioning. We are now spending enormous resources, military capability, and international goodwill trying to get back to the starting point. And while all of that is happening, other major powers are watching, calculating, and waiting for the right moment. That is not a victory by any definition. That is a very expensive, very risky way to end up exactly where you began. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.